Next, we are going to be solving quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula, but first you have to earn it. We're going to look at two different ways to derive the quadratic formula, both one by completing the square, another by just using some legal algebra moves and a little bit of creativity to derive the quadratic formula. Now, you may know what the quadratic formula is, but have always wondered where it came from. Well, you're lucky in that today we're going to find out what that is. Now, on both of these methods, we're going to start out with the general form for a quadratic equation, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You can write this method on the left-hand side of the column in your notes, because on the next slide, we're going to be filling out the right-hand column. Okay? But first, for the left-hand column, deriving the quadratic formula by completing the square. At this point, we should be at least a little bit comfortable with completing the square. Now, we know the first thing we do is the coefficient of x squared must be 1. So we've got to divide everything through by the a value so that we will have 1x squared plus b over a x plus c over a equals 0 divided by a is just going to be 0. The next thing we do is we move the number out of the way, subtract c over a from both sides. So now we have x squared plus b over a x equals a negative c over a. And as we are going through this, if you would like to compare what we're doing with what we did on the last example, you'll notice that what we're doing when we derive the quadratic formula is the exact same steps as what we did in example 5. So this really should be nothing new. It looks a little bit different with having the a, the b, the c instead of numbers, but we are going to treat the a, b, and c just as we did numbers. The next step here was to find the magic number that would make the left-hand side be a perfect square trinomial. So remember, what we do is we take the coefficient of x, that would be the b over a, and we take half of that, that would simplify to be b over 2a, and then the next step is we square it. So our magic number is b squared over 4a squared. We're going to add that to both the left-hand side as well as the right-hand side. Now, we should be able to factor on the left-hand side, just as we did in the last example, and then we'll combine those fractions on the right-hand side in just a minute. Now, when we're factoring, first times first is going to multiply together to give us x squared. Then we're looking for the two numbers that multiply together to give us b squared over 4a squared and add to give us b over a. Remember your shortcut. It's going to be right here, right after you took half of the coefficient of x, but before you squared it. So this thing factors into x plus b over 2a times x plus b over 2a. And if you want to pause right here and FOIL that out to check it, it should FOIL out to give us the x squared plus b over a x plus b squared over 4a squared. Now, we are going to write this as x plus b over 2a quantity squared. So we factored on the left-hand side. We're now going to combine on the right-hand side. Again, we have fractions, and to be able to combine fractions, we need a common denominator. The least common denominator between a and 4a squared is 4a squared. So what we are missing here is a 4 and an a to give us the 4a squared. So we're going to multiply the denominator by 4a as well as the numerator by 4a. Now 4a times a negative c is negative 4ac over the 4a squared. That's just another way to write negative c over a. It's built up, but it's the same thing. And we are going to add that to b squared over 4a squared. Now when we add fractions together, the denominator stays the same, the 4a squared, and we will combine the numerators. Now instead of writing negative 4ac plus b squared, I'm going to choose to write the positive term first, the b squared, and then the minus 4ac. I just think it looks prettier. I think that looks prettier than that. Okay? Now, what we've got going on, because if you remember, A's, B's, and C's all stand for numbers, we've got a quantity squared equals a number. At this point, we are ready to take the square root of both sides, not forgetting your plus or minus symbol when you do that. So remaining on the left-hand side, we have x plus b over 2a. On the right-hand side, we have positive and negative, the square root of the top, b squared minus 4ac, over the square root of the bottom. Now, that numerator, the square root of b squared minus 4ac, does not simplify. That is as good as you can get. Now the denominator, the square root of 4a squared, is the square root of 4 times the square root of a squared. And so we get 2a. Right? One other little step to solve for x, and that is to subtract this fraction from both sides of b over 2a. And so x is equal to, because we're trying to find the solutions for x, a negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, that as well as over 2a. And so we'll probably see x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all of that over 2a when we combine. Now this little gem right here is called our quadratic formula. It's a formula that will give you the solutions for x to any quadratic equation of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. It's great. Let's talk about in the next video, let's talk about another way to find this quadratic formula, because it's so fun, and that's why.